Hello, my name is Lauren Ewell, and I will be reading my conference paper, which is titled Jane Shore's The Lord Mayor's Wife, Marriage, Masculinity, and Legitimacy in Heywood's Edward IV. Once fortified boundaries of Elizabethan England are ripping at the seams, and in the first and second parts of Edward IV by Thomas Heywood, they just keep getting crossed. The play opens with the Duchess of York hysterically chastising her son, King Edward IV, for undermining socio-political conventions by marrying Elizabeth Woodville for love. Edward IV is not only compromising the diplomatic purpose of royal marriages, but he married someone who the majority of his advisors already deemed unacceptable. She was a widow, a mother, and tied by birth and marriage to Lancastrian families. But Edward IV and Elizabeth are not the only ones to have crossed boundaries in this play, however. Jane Shore does too. As the wife of goldsmith Matthew Shore, Jane is asked to serve as the Lord Mayor's wife for a brief dinner after a pivotal battle is won. The seemingly uneventful favor that Jane performs reveals the nature of this critically overlooked role, as well as that of her Lord Mayors. In exploring why the office of Lord Mayor's wife must be occupied and the roles and qualifications innate to both the Mayoress and the Lord Mayor, I argue that one of the most important qualifications any early modern man must obtain is that of a strategic marriage, because it is the marker of his masculinity, power, and legitimacy. To better understand why marriage makes the man in Heywood's Edward IV, I will first detail the main man and office of interest to this argument, the Lord Mayors. Every year, London elects a new Lord Mayor. This highly coveted position is not available to just anyone. Aspiring Lord Mayors must first be citizens of London, and after apprenticing for one of London's companies, they must become the master of the guild and then be elected to serve as one of the 12 high-ranking elected officials to represent that guild for London, otherwise known as the position of alderman. From here, they are eligible to serve as an alderman sheriff, who is one of the 2 elected figures to represent London in official settings. They support and advise the Lord Mayor, helping him host dinners, traveling with him on official business, and ensuring that the courts run smoothly. Once these qualifications have been met, those aspiring Lord Mayors are finally eligible for the Aldermen's Council's consideration. And those lucky enough to be chosen they celebrate their inauguration on the Lord Mayor's Day. Typically held in late October, the Lord Mayor's Day is marked by its festivity, its pageantry, and its magnificence. This all-day event begins in the morning, where the rising and the incumbent Lord Mayors are first escorted in formal procession across Cheapside and along Sloper Lane down to the River Thames. From there, quote, the party embarked in barges, usually at Three Cranes Wharf, to be taken upriver to Westminster for the oath-taking in front of the representatives of the Crown. This journey was celebrated by fireworks, cannons, and ornately painted and decorated barges. And on the river, the Lord Mayor and his entourage were entertained by mythical beasts and emblematic figures in what was known as, quote, the water show, unquote. Then they moved upriver to Paul's Churchyard, along the pageant stations, and continued back up Cheapside. By the afternoon, the Lord Mayor and his sheriffs hosted a formal banquet in Guild Hall before heading back to St. Paul's for a sermon, which marked the inauguration. It is clear that the steep qualifications and intricate rituals tied to Lord Mayorship are designed so that the office is properly upheld. Such was only fitting for a Lord Mayor who is widely considered the most important commoner of the country, the monarch substitute, and in many ways London herself. His inauguration to the highly feminized city of London can be likened to a marriage ceremony. Gail Kernpaster notes that, quote, because the city was walled for most of its history, it is early associated with the female principle. As a fortified place subject to siege and assault, this personified city becomes associated with a sexual position. End quote. If the Lord Mayor's marriage to the city was such a necessary and celebrated ritual to the office, can the same be said about his own marriage to the Mayoress? In fact, where is she during this inauguration? Is she part of the entourage? Is she helping host the afternoon banquet? At this time, there do not appear to be any records indicating that the Lord Mayor's wife, if he has one, is present during the Lord Mayor Days rituals, though the office is shown in Edward IV as needing to be occupied. If she is presumably not needed on the Lord Mayor's Day, then when is she? Although the Lord Mayor has undergone all these rituals and has met all these qualifications, he still proves unfit for one function, hosting the king in his home. He alone cannot fulfill this very important role. The only person who can make or break this pivotal impression is that of his mayoress. In further exploring why the office of mayoress must be occupied, what role she performs, and what qualifications she needs to meet, I will turn back to Edward IV to show how the Lord Mayor's wife is one of the most important unwritten qualifications for his office. And like the Lord Mayor, she too must prove fit to serve as the first among many. Who is Heywood's Jane Shore? In the first and second parts of Edward IV, Jane Shore is characterized as, quote, a dainty wife, and, quote, the flower of London, end quote, and a prize to be won by Falconbridge, who, accompanied by his rebels, aims to enter the city and dethrone King Edward IV. And after Spicing threatens Shore to fetch Jane, or else, quote, all the golden Cheapside cannot ransom her, end quote, Falconbridge adds that he will make Jane his wife, and, quote, that's flat, end quote. Here, Jane is first distinguished as a prize to be sought, a diamond in the rough, whose union with Matthew Shore rests on unsteady grounds. And as the, quote, flower of London, Jane is compared to a rose, which can be read as a reference to the War of the Roses or that which engulfed Jane's historic legacy. This interpretation would paint Jane's character as the embodiment of deep-seated conflicts surrounding legitimacy, boundaries, power struggles, characteristic to this event. It is important to note that Falconbridge and his rebels descended from York to London and knew of Jane Shore prior to entering the city's walls. This not only shows how widely known Jane was for her beauty and virtue, but it already distinguishes her as cut from a different cloth from other women of the city, perhaps as a woman worthy of holding the position of first among many. By Act 2, Jane's virtues take center stage. She is shown to be devoted to Matthew, expressing inconsolable grief at the thought of remarrying should he die in combat. And she exhibits an honorable agency when she challenges the officer who arrives to inform the couple that Matthew has been summoned by the Lord Mayor for battle. Though Matthew ultimately contains her and he departs, Jane's performance of wife is shown to be a profitable investment for any man, especially that of the Lord Mayor. As the Lord Mayor prepares to host the king for a celebratory feast honoring the defeat of Fortinbras and the rebels, he reflects on his journey to this point. But first, he defends his choice of garments. Quote, I, Mary Crosby, this befits thee well, but some will marvel that with scarlet gown I wear a gilded rapier by my side. Why, I let them know that I was knighted in the field for my good service to my lord the king, and therefore wear it lawfully in court, in city, or at any royal banquet, end quote. From Act 4, Scene 2. That which befits him well is his scarlet gown, which he and the aldermen wear to extrinsically mark their rank. The gilded rapier, however, is reserved for knights, which the Lord Mayor rightfully earns in battle from the king. As he is alone on stage and presumably standing in front of a mirror, or at least looking down at his garments, to whom is he justifying himself to? Having risen through the ranks over the years, the Lord Mayor's dress has evolved with him, from apprentice to master, sheriff to alderman, and now this, he has had to maintain a delicate dance of matching his intrinsic status to his garments. As an inaugurated Lord Mayor, he is paraded through London with his scarlet gown already, but now with knighthood, his garment requirements have changed once again. The scrupulous Elizabethan clothing regulations present during Heywood's day aimed at maintaining the litany of boundaries amongst her subjects, and they seem to justifiably cause the Lord Mayor anxiety, for any slippage can result in fines and reputation damage. To reassure himself, the Lord Mayor then reflects on his journey to this position of Lord Mayor. But soft, John Crosby, thou forgett'st thyself, and dost not mind thy birth and patronage. Where thou wast born, and whence thou art derived, I do not shame to say the Hospital of London was the chiefest first-string place. There I did learn that near unto a cross, commonly called Cow Cross, near Islington, an honest citizen did chance to find me. A poor shoemaker by his trade he was, and doubting of my Christendom, or no, called me according to the place he found me, John Crosby, finding me so by a cross. The masters of the hospital at further years bound me apprentice to the grocer's trade, wherein God pleased to bless my poor endeavors, that by his blessing I am come to this. End quote. That was from Act 4, Scene 2. The office of Lord Mayor is nothing without the legitimacy of its holder. Lost momentarily in the anxiety about the nuance of his garments, John Crosby grounds himself in remembering his ascension to this role. Born in London, he was named John Crosby by an honest shoemaker, His name, inherent to place within London, is instrumental in fulfilling the first qualification of aspiring Lord Mayors: they must be citizens of London. And after apprenticing in the grocer's trade, he seems to jump from master straight to Lord Mayor. This glossing over of details may indicate that Heywood's John Crosby illegitimately holds the office of Lord Mayor, which would cross deeply held boundaries of who rightfully can hold it. If Heywood's Lord Mayor is unqualified for the role, then how can John Crosby perform legitimacy for the king now? What markers would indicate the qualifications have been met? Desperate to perform his duties well in front of the king this evening, John Crosby then laments his status of a widower. Quote, "See what it is to be a widower in the lack of a lady mayoress in such a need," end quote. This indicates that without a mayoress, the Lord Mayor is insufficiently prepared to host the king. As previously mentioned, one of the alderman sheriff's duties is assisting the Lord Mayor in official banquets. Why are they not called upon here? Is it because this event is more of an intimate gathering than it is an official banquet? Or is it because it's located in the Lord Mayor's home, wherein the duties befall his mayoress? In hosting the king, the Lord Mayor is performing legitimate masculinity to his king as a husband. His homosocial act can best be understood in Chapter 3 of Alexander Shepard's Meanings of Manhood in Early Modern England. Here, Shepard posits that through marriage, the man is made an authority figure. Quote, "The self-government expected of manhood was the basis of men's claims to authority. Men could not govern others if they were unable to govern themselves. Heading a household was associated with the mastery not only of a man's self, but of his subordinates and his resources, and in this way it was often equated with manhood itself." It becomes clear that not only does the Lord Mayor need a mayoress to fulfill certain hosting duties, but he needs her to prove that he is fit to govern in front of the highest governing man in England. The widowed mayor then frantically calls upon Jane Shore, his, quote, "gentle niece," to serve as the mayoress, quote, "or else we are shamed forever," end quote. Shore, speaking for Jane, readily accepts the invitation and thanks the Lord Mayor for allowing them to use their, quote, "homely help" to assist this evening. Because her legitimizing power now speaks volumes to Matthew's role as her husband, Jane not only saves the Lord Mayor from humiliation, but she also boosts her husband's masculine credibility as well. And after Matthew agrees to have Jane serve as mayoress, the Lord Mayor thanks the Shores. He admires Jane's immediate impact on the home. Quote, "Why, see how neatly she bestirs herself, and in good sooth makes housewifery to shine. Ah, my lady mayoress, had my lady mayoress lived to see fair Mistress Shore this beautify her house, she would have had not little to be proud of," end quote. Having made no physical changes to the home or to her garments, Jane is characterized as inherently befitting the Lord Mayor's wife, as if she was destined for it. Regardless, it is important to remember that Heywood writes of a potentially unqualified Lord Mayor taking a married city wife as his mayoress before hosting the king. What does that say about the office of Lord Mayor? And more importantly, what does that say about the institution and function of marriage? As the Lord Mayor continues to fuss over the details, Jane assures him that, quote, "all things are in perfect readiness," end quote. Immediately thereafter, stage directions indicate that the servants bring forth the table and serve in the banquet. It was as if they were waiting for the mayoress to give the word. Not only does this show one of the mayoress's assumed duties, but it also reveals her role is instrumental in the Lord Mayor's performance for the king. Should the Lord Mayor not be married, who would be qualified to have things in perfect readiness for the king? After trumpets signaled his arrival, the king first thanks the Lord Mayor for his service against Falconbridge, and then asks, "But where is my lady mayoress? I hope she will bid us welcome too." Thus, formally welcoming the king into the home is another ceremonial duty of the mayoress. Once the Lord Mayor introduces Jane and explains that she will occupy the office of his late wife, the king immediately associates Jane with her husband in his egregious misdeed he committed earlier that day. Quote, "And gentlewoman, now before you face, I must condemn him of great discourtesy. Yea, of great wrong he hath offered you. For you had been a lady but for him. He was in fault. Trust me, he was to blame to hinder virtue of her due right." It is important to note that the king is not offended that Shore's refusal of knighthood could be considered a blatant act of defiance against the crown. He is actually offended that Shore's refusal of knighthood cost Jane the chance to become a lady, which by her virtue he believes she rightfully deserves. In this moment, he also distinguishes Jane as overqualified to be a goldsmith's wife and more deserving of higher rank. This recognition immediately legitimizes Jane's role as mayoress and increases the Lord Mayor's credit. But it puts her in a tricky position. How is she to respond? What is her role here? She is legally married to Matthew Shore, and yet she is serving as the Lord Mayor's wife. She represents not only her husband and his guild, but the Lord Mayor and all of London's citizens. If she is to agree with the king's sentiments here, she undermines her role as Matthew Shore's dutiful and loyal wife. And yet if she contradicts the king, she risks compromising the Lord Mayor's credit, which would reflect poorly on him and the women and men of London. With great poise, Jane manages to answer in a way that keeps all of her roles and their adjoining counterparts at bay. Quote, "My gracious Lord, poor and humble thoughts never had an eye to such unworthiness. And though some hold it as a maxim that women's minds by nature do aspire, yet how both God and Master Shore I thank for my continuance in this humble state, and likewise how I love your majesty for his gracious sufferance that it may be so. Heaven bear the true record of my inmost soul. Now it remains on my Lord Mayor's behalf, I do such duty as becometh me, to bid your highness welcome to his house. Were welcome's virtue powerful my word, the King of England should not doubt thereof." By first thinking the king is gracious, she recognizes the king's flattery, which validates his perspective and maintains her allegiance to the crown. She then claims that she is unworthy of such praise, which favorably works to showcase her virtue of humility. And by then thanking God and Master Shore for, quote, "my continuance in this humble state," Jane makes clear her devotion to Christ and her gratitude for her union with Matthew. She likens the sentiments of love and devotion back to the king, who she again names as gracious in his sufferance, so it may be so. By opening her response and grounding it again in the middle with praiseworthy sentiments towards the king, Jane shows him that as a woman of faith and the wife of Matthew Shore, all things still revolve around the king. This carefully crafted response demonstrates that Jane is able to balance her various duties as wife, religious follower, and loyal subject to the king without contradiction. And when she notes that heaven knows the true record of her soul, she indirectly addresses Elizabethan anxieties around her inconsistent dress and rank. Jane arrives to the Lord Mayor's house as a city wife, who presumably wore a fitted bodice and a long skirt. When she agrees to serve as the mayoress that evening, she does not have the time to change, nor does anyone express that she needs to. This not only suggests that the king was right about Jane and that she is befitting of a higher rank, but that God created her worthy of such a role, so much so that a garment reflecting her status is irrelevant because her virtue shines through and makes this apparent. Jane then pivots back to her most relevant role for the night, the mayoress. She reiterates her duty in welcoming His Highness to the Lord Mayor's home and asserts that her virtue in welcoming him should not be doubted, and thus concludes her brilliantly crafted response. Jane successfully balances all of her duties and roles in a way that not only flatters the king, but also her husband and Lord Mayor. She almost outperforms her role. Regardless of her performance here and throughout the rest of the evening, key information is revealed of the offices of Lord Mayor and Mayoress and the power of marriage. The king is astounded, so astounded that he declares that Mistress Shore's welcome is more powerful than the Lord Mayor's, as, quote, her tongue hath gilded it. And then he asks Lord Howard and Sir Thomas Sellinger if they've ever seen a citizen wife so fair. Howard replies that he has never observed a woman, quote, every way so absolute, end quote, and Sellinger notes that if he were king, quote, he could afford Shore's wife to be queen, end quote. This evokes a very strange reaction from the king. While he is drawn to Jane and presumably agrees with Howard and Sellinger's assessments, Edward IV now recognizes the incredible impact of a woman's power and a man's masculinity through marriage. Just recently, he crossed historic boundaries to wed a woman who many in his court have deemed unsuitable for queen. And as the Duchess of York pointed out, this has already negatively impacted his public perception as the King of France, his council, and all of his subjects. So in response, and in grappling with this, he compares Jane to his queen, and in an attempt to convince both himself and those listening that his queen is befitting of her office and that Jane is a mere wench compared to her, no one bats an eye. But rather than open this up for a debate, he quickly instead proposes a toast to the quote, elected mayoress as he struggles to keep his, quote, idle eye from, quote, gadding still at her. In juxtaposing the Lord Mayor's need for a mayoress and the controversy ensued over the king's choice in queen, it becomes clear that that legitimate masculinity for early modern men, especially those in positions of power, is upheld through an acceptable marriage. Scholarly debates surrounding masculinity, marriage, and the role of early modern women and the Lord Mayor's wife can be enhanced by considering Jane as the Lord Mayor's wife. But Jane is not the only mayoress in early modern theater. Marjorie Eyre's performance as Lord Mayor Simon Eyre's wife in Decker's city comedy The Shoemaker's Holiday will also be explored in a larger project. Marjorie's performance, however, is in stark contrast to Jane's. Marjorie resists participating in traditional wifely roles to a fault, expresses more vanity than virtue, and is more often than not the butt of all the jokes. This leads me to wonder if marriage in itself is the most crucial signifier of adult masculinity, or if the Lord Mayor's choice in wife is just as important. Whatever combination of the two, I'm keenly interested in where the mayoress of London takes me.